ladies and gentlemen. It's a real joy and a pleasure to be here with you, particularly as we have come all the way to engage with the leaders of the G7 through the outreach meeting that will be held over this weekend. But we thought it would be wonderful to have this opportunity to engage with business leaders here in Canada. So we welcome this opportunity to talk about our country, and a country that some of you have chosen to invest in, and a country that many of you are considering investments in, and a country that some of you have already signed checks to invest in. So it's wonderful to be here with you. South Africa and Canada enjoy very strong bilateral relations that have stemmed from history, and it's been a history of solidarity and friendship between our two countries. In the drafting of our own constitution, which I participated in, we learned much from the Constitution of Canada, particularly the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Canada provided us with valuable support during our march to democracy, and we drew quite a lot of lessons from your Constitution. Not only that, but in finally drafting the text of our Constitution, we relied on someone from here in Canada to help us write our Constitution in plain English so that it does not resemble the type of constitutions that you get all over the world. And that is why today South Africa's Constitution is written in the most simple and plain English language that you can find. And that made it easier for our Constitution then to be translated into all the other 10 languages in our country. So our Constitution was easily translatable into the 10 languages because the foundation document had been written in simple and plain language through the help of someone that we got here in Canada. We cooperate with Canada in a number of international forums, some of which are the UN, the G20, the Commonwealth, and the Keynes Group. It is therefore fitting that we should meet here to further deepen the relations between our two countries, particularly in areas of trade and investment. Let me immediately say that a number of you are already invested in South Africa, for which we thank you. And you've stayed with South Africa over the many years, and some of you were about to lose hope and confidence, but we're pleased that you stayed the course and you are still investors in our country. So we really deeply thank you. It is for also that reason that we felt we should come here on our way to Quebec to the G7 meeting. We're meeting also in the midst of a global economy that is showing signs of recovery and improved growth, which is wonderful. However, it also remains vulnerable with the global trade war, which is looming, and a return to protectionism, but also the weakening of multilateral rules-based international trade systems and other multilateral organizations. This, for us, is worrying. South Africa sees Canada as a strategic partner as we navigate through all these difficult and worrying issues that have to be addressed by the world. And hopefully the G7 meeting will be able to find solutions for some of these very difficult issues. We find Canada's approach to many of these things very refreshing, very progressive, which is very aligned to our general approach to issues that have to do with the multilateral system, that what we should be seeking to do as countries in the world is to strengthen the multilateral system and not resort to protectionism and to resort more to open trade so that through trade we can engender greater growth in the economies of various countries in the world. Our country has entered what we have characterized as a new dawn, a new era in which our people are glowing, are looking forward to an improvement of many things in their lives. It is almost akin to when we heralded our democracy in 1994, when Nelson Mandela became our president. The country was filled with hope and enthusiasm, looking forward to better things in the future. Almost the same type of enthusiasm has arisen in our country. Yesterday, last night, as we came here, I had occasion to speak at the 100th celebration of the Afrikaner Bond. The Afrikaner Bond was the organization that was formed 100 years ago by Afrikaners. And Afrikaner Bond was the engine room, the key driver of apartheid policies in our country. They are the ones who ensured that South Africa became the repressive and racist country that it finally became. And they did this as a reaction to what the British did to them more than 100 years ago. They clubbed together, formed a racially based organization to defend themselves and to advance their own interests. So yesterday, they were celebrating 100 years. They used to be called the Afrikaner Broederbond. They've now reformed it to be the Afrikaner Bond. And they were saying to us yesterday, Mr. President, we've heard your message about looking forward to a South Africa that's united, a South Africa where we all work together. We can tell you now that we have embraced that, and we have also embraced another rallying call that you have made, which is send me. Send me to go and repair what was damaged in the past. Send me to go and put right what was wrong in the past. Send me to serve the interests of the people of South Africa. And they all stood up and said, send us, Mr. President, because we want to work for a South Africa that's new, that's renewed, and that's moving forward. For Afrikaners who espoused an ideology of racism over more than 90-something years, to have stood up and said, you are our president. And we as Afrikaners have embraced a new South Africa, and we are prepared to deal on a consensus-building basis with all issues that our country is dealing with, including the question of land, which is the most important for them, means that indeed South Africa has changed and we are moving forward. So I welcomed with both arms their change of style, their change of approach, and this to us meant that indeed this new dawn is also having great benefits in getting people who were the real chief advocates of apartheid to have turned around and to become the advocates of a new South Africa where they have to work with us to usher in the changes that need to happen. Business confidence and investor sentiment in our country is improving. We do a lot of work now with business in terms of addressing key challenges that our country faces, and government is also responding to create a dynamic and enabling business environment that will promote greater productive investment. And we are also undertaking measures to set the economy on a new path of growth, of employment, as well as a new path of transformation. And we are moving swiftly to restore the credibility And we're also doing quite a lot to improve the governance of the various institutions that are either state-owned or state-led, and also to implement turnaround strategies at South Africa's state-owned enterprises. Now, according to a Goldman Sachs report which was issued at the beginning of the year, South Africa, they had suggested, is regarded as a hot emerging market with lucrative opportunities for both foreign and domestic investors. In March, Moody's revised South Africa's economic outlook from negative to stable. Now, this is a positive development and a positive trend which we want to see continuing. And this can be attributed to the implementation of more predictable and transparent policies that we have insisted needs to be the order of the day, so that we move away from the uncertainty at a policy level that many investors have raised their concerns over. Because many investors, in interacting with us, have said, whilst we see that South Africa has a number of great opportunities, your policy uncertainty environment makes us hold back from investing. And let me say, it did not only negatively affect foreign investors, it also affected local investors, because as they found that our policy was flip-flopping, changing, and where there was continuous policy uncertainty, investors held back. Now, in this new dawn, because this is what this new dawn is really all about as well, is to make sure that there is policy certainty, there is political stability, and there is credibility in what we do as government. Now, the revised outlook that was also issued conveys the message that South Africa is politically and economically stable, and that in itself should make us much more attractive to potential investors, which we truly have become and are becoming on an ongoing basis. We do not underestimate the task that lies ahead, because having gone through a number of years where quite a lot of damage was done to our credibility, there is a huge task ahead for us to repair that damage. But you can be rest assured that we're now much more determined to address these policy uncertainty issues and instill much more confidence in what we are doing. The latest economic growth figures for the first quarter particularly show that mining and agriculture and manufacturing are under a great deal of pressure. At the same time, the figures show that the service industries are resilient. They demonstrate also that greater and more sustained growth requires decisive measures to address the key structural challenges in our economy. We are therefore investing significantly in making sure that these reforms that have to be embarked upon do indeed happen, so that the attraction that we can be to foreign investors becomes much more solid. And we are working as government to address, obviously, the issue of education, skills development, and we also going to be using our competition policies to create opportunities for market entrance. We're also addressing the issue of the cost of doing business in South Africa, but also addressing the issue of economic infrastructure. Government is working with urgency to guide the economy towards a more sustainable growth trajectory and to restore South Africa to investment-grade status. when we next interact with rating agencies, we want to be able, in a demonstrable way, to show them that indeed we are serious about the reforms, we're implementing the reforms that need to be implemented, we're buttoning down stability, and policy certainty has become the order of the day. And government and private sector, labor and civil society are working together on a social compact to create more jobs, and particularly for young people. One of the derivatives, or the dividends rather, of this new period in which we are, is the creation of more and more a situation of trust between labor, business, government, and civil society. And that trust has been engendered through being able to tackle quite a number of difficult issues and finding solutions. And this has created a wonderful platform for us to be able to embark on a number of initiatives with the business community, initiatives that are going to stand us in good stead as we move on. We've been able to tackle, for instance, setting up a fund for investing in small and medium enterprises. We've also recently been able to address the issue of youth unemployment, where the business community came up, as they were asked to, came up with a wonderful scheme which is going to draw in up to 1 million young people into a program where we introduce them to the world of work and enable them to be employable at a much faster rate. We are working to significantly also increase the levels of investment in the economy. We know that foreign direct investment is the critical driver to the economic growth of our economy, or for the growth of our economy, for both developing and developed economies. It strengthens productive capacity through the transfer of technology and knowledge, and this is something that we are focusing on. And it is with this in mind that we have decided to embark on what others would call an ambitious investment drive that aims to raise $100 billion in the next 5 years into fixed investment in our economy. We've appointed 4 investment envoys, one of whom is here, that will drive this process, and we hope and know that they will be meeting with potential investors into our economy, and they are working towards a major investment conference that will take place in South Africa in October later this year. It is at this conference that we plan to announce several deals that we believe we will have been able to reach with a number of potential investors. We don't want this conference to be a talk shop about creation of a climate for investment. We want that to be done way ahead, like we are doing today. We did one in London, we're going to do another one in New York, we're going to do another one in Nairobi and a number of other African places, and hopefully Hong Kong as well, so that we clear the decks and talk about the creation of an investment climate at an early stage, so that when we get to the conference, we're then able to talk about real investments that are going to be put into the ground in South African soil. And much of what we're doing is to do precisely what we hope to do with you today, to engage with you, to discuss the issues that are top of mind to you, that are impediments to you investing in an economy like ours, and to be able to address some of the questions, the concerns that you might well have. Our one entity that promotes investment, called Invest SA, has established one-stop shops which bring together key government departments in a single location to provide specialist advisory service, fast-track investment projects, and reduce regulatory burdens for investors. One of you, as I was coming up here, said to me, resolve the bureaucracy challenges. If you resolve those bureaucracy challenges, we will find it a lot easier to invest in the economy. That is precisely what the Invest SA is meant to do. And indeed, I guess in any economy you will find that there are bureaucrats who will always stand as gatekeepers, who will always stand and impede investment from flowing in. And this is what we would like to hear, to address, because we want to remove all obstacles for investment to flow into our country. A significant part of our economic development agenda is to promote greater economic cooperation amongst African countries. Earlier this year, we were part of a group of African countries in a summit in Rwanda where countries committed themselves to the establishment of an African continental free trade area. This free trade area will create a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business and persons. It is through increasing intra-African trade and investment that we will be able to grow the economies of a number of African countries, to develop them, but it will also help to diversify them so that they become much more attractive to investors. Now, South Africa signed the declaration and did not sign the actual free trade agreement because we have a thoroughgoing consultation and approval process which ends up with our cabinet and parliament. So we are going through that, and we will be able to confirm at the next African Union Summit in July that indeed we are part of the continental free trade area. This is an important part of our efforts to ensure that we can get Africa growing and to kickstart growth, particularly in our own economy, because as we often say, we are the gateway into Africa. We are the most developed economy in the African continent, and we therefore are the gateway. We want to benefit all the countries on the African continent, and we say we want to play our key role as an enabler as well, and also as the gateway. And key to the success of our efforts is a firm partnership with business and labor, and we also want to see that being played out in our various other African countries. Now, we've done a lot to engender a very good climate for investment in our country. And on the energy side, we've moved forward tremendously. We've introduced Independent Power Producers Program that has unlocked significant investment in renewable energy while contributing to a more diverse energy mix and advancing our efforts to mitigate climate change. Our Minister of Environmental Affairs, Ms. Edna Molewa here, was one of the leading lights during the Paris negotiations on climate change, and she is one of those who has been leading the charge to make sure that South Africa does indeed move beyond just making slogans about climate change, but also becomes an active participant. So as we have embraced the challenges that are given rise by climate change, we've also moved forward when it comes to renewable energy. And we are also working closely with our neighbors in Southern Africa on regional opportunities to exploit natural gas and also coal bed, methane, and shale gas. We're giving renewed attention to mining, an industry that has been in decline in our country over many years, but which still holds huge potential for job creation, for growth, for beneficiation, transformation, and empowerment. We will shortly For those of you who are investors in mining, we will shortly be finalizing a mining charter in consultation with the industry, labor, affected communities, and our stakeholders. I've appointed a minister who used to be a miner himself, an underground miner on our coal mines and other metals, and he is steaming ahead. And he wants to make sure that we do have a mining charter that will be finalized. And the wonderful thing is that he's working with the industry, but he's gone even beyond that. He's working with communities. He's trawling the country, left, right, and center, going to communities in the rural areas where the mines are. And he's engaging with the industry, the communities, and labor. And I'm hopeful that we will have a mining charter which everybody will buy into, that will also enable many of you to continue investing in our mining industry. My compatriot here, Roger Baxter, is here from the now renamed Council of, what do you call it now? Yeah, that's right. It used to be called the Chamber of Mines in my days. Now he's here working with Minister Gwede Mantashe, and they are going to together finalize the mining charter. I know that many of you are interested in this because South Africa and Canada are linked almost at the hip on issues that have to do with mining. And some of our companies are invested here like De Beers, and some of you are invested in our mining industry. So I can give you assurance now that the issues that have to do with our mining charter are being finalized, and they will be finalized too. I know that they gave rise to the doubts and the uncertainty that you had in the past in the way that the mining charter was being handled, but right now the minister has taken it in his hand and is working with the industry and labor to address this. We're therefore looking to Canada as an important source of investment, an important partner and collaboration in our mining sector as we finalize this. And in the end, our aim is to unlock the economic potential of our country, which has been constrained for decades by policies of racial exclusion. For generations, Black South Africans were denied opportunities to own assets, to establish businesses, as well as to acquire skills and to enter professions. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the patterns of ownership and the usage of land in our country. The extreme concentration of the ownership of land is one of the great impediments to the full realization of our country's potential. It's a country where you had 87% of the land being set aside for a tiny minority population, and only 13% being set aside for the majority population. Now, that in itself was a recipe for great disaster. I was saying earlier, talking to some of the colleagues here, that the organization that I now lead, the African National Congress, was set up to resist and to fight against the land laws that were implemented or that were being introduced by the past apartheid rulers of the country. And thank you. So that having happened in 1912, and our freedom having taken 82 years to be achieved, the issue that led to the formation of the ANC did not evaporate over the 82 years. It did not disappear. And as we negotiated our constitution, it was an issue that had to be dealt with in the constitution. And in dealing with it, we needed to go beyond, as we crafted our Bill of Rights, we needed to go beyond just saying there shall be respect for property rights. We needed to deal with the history of our own country in Section 25 of our Constitution. which deals with the issue of land, because it was land that was taken away from the majority of the people of South Africa, and it was land that led to the formation of the ANC. So therefore, we had to deal with it. In the Constitution, I was saying earlier to some colleagues here that there were a couple of issues as I was involved in the drafting of the Constitution that really almost stood in the way of South Africa becoming the democracy that we are today. It was the issue of land, language, and education. Those were the three key issues that almost took us to a referendum. Because in the interim constitution, we had put in place that if we couldn't find agreement on these three issues, we would have to take the country to a referendum. And we sought to find, that was the fourth issue. The fourth issue was the right to strike. Those were the four issues. And as it happened, we reached a deadlock on all those four issues. The issue of land was the original sin that had to be addressed and forgiven. 2, the issue of the right to strike. Organized labor in our country had always wanted the right to strike so that when you go on strike, you should not be fired from your job, which used to happen under apartheid. The issue of language was an important one, particularly for the Afrikaners, and the issue of education as well. We finally got to resolving all these issues. And it was out of the wisdom of a leader like Nelson Mandela, who, as we negotiated and sought to find solutions, I got into the habit of going to see him at 3 o'clock in the morning, knocking on his window and saying, wake up, please wake up so that we can brief you about where we are on the issue of land, language, and so forth. And in the end, his great wisdom enabled us to find solutions, and we settled. But having settled this, yes, we found that the issue of land has reared its head again. It's reared its head in that people are saying, much as you have crafted it into our constitution, we are not really seeing the land coming back to us. We now want you to do something extra. We relied on the concept we miss in a way crafted, which is willing buyer, willing seller. I was told earlier, Mr. Jones here said, here in Canada it was willing buyer, unwilling seller. That's what you should have relied on, because nobody really ever willingly sells. And maybe we could have found easy answers, but we relied on willing buyer, willing seller, and many of them did not want to sell at a price that would have made the fiscus, because it was the government really that was paying. Now, with time, over the past 24 years, very little land has really moved into the hands of our people. And our people are saying, hey, there is an original sin that was committed many years ago. That sin remains unaddressed, it remains unforgiven. We want this to be handled. So the conference in December decided that we do need now to expropriate land without compensation, but in doing so, we must make sure that it does not harm the economy, and 2, it does not reduce agricultural production and does not harm food security. Now, that is the decision that was taken. But the other important one is that this decision was taken as one of the mechanisms that the government should use, and not the only mechanism in pursuing the land reform program. So the land reform program will be pursued even as water flows from the table, on that table there. So it will be pursued. But as we pursue as we accelerate land reform, including land redistribution, we are going to make sure that we secure the property rights of South Africans. And in respecting the property rights of South Africans, we must also respect the property rights of labor tenants, the rural poor, because they too are in hunger for land, and they also want to get property rights. Now, this will be done through a range of measures, which will include expropriation, as I said, and we are determined that this should be achieved in a manner that is consistent with our Constitution. The last discussion that we had as the ruling party or the governing party was that whilst the constitutional provision is there, we're going to test this provision in the Constitution, because this constitutional provision could well be able to inform how best we go ahead with this whole process. Now, the process is going on in Parliament. Parliament has set up a constitutional review committee. Already we've had 140,000 and more submissions. May I say that when we drafted the Constitution, we had up to 1 million submissions from all South Africans, from many South Africans rather, who made submissions on how their Bill of Rights should be crafted, on how we should deal with education, how we should deal with culture, everything. So all those submissions were then agglomerated, analyzed, and synthesized, and finally we agreed to the Constitution that we now have today. Similarly, we are going to do exactly the same. We are going to give consideration to the submissions that have been put forward, and we are going to come up with a solution, a South African-made solution that is going to address the fears, the concerns, and the aspirations of the majority of our people. And when we do so, we will do it in the South African way, where we are able to reach consensus, where we are able to deal with the views of everyone who will submit views. And I can tell you that we are not going to be adventurist, we are not going to be reckless, we are going to be as forward-looking as we possibly can to see what value can be unlocked from this important resource as to benefit the entire population of South Africa. So for those who have fears, who have concerns about the manner in which we will handle the land question, I would say we are going to do it within the constitutional provisions of the agreement, the compact that we've reached as South Africans, and we are going to make sure that everybody's views are taken on board. And we will be as responsible as Nelson Mandela was, as he crafted, and he led us to craft our new democracy. South Africa has a number of attractive sectors, such as mining, oil and gas, and a number of others. And we've established special economic zones and industrial incentive programs to encourage investors to take up opportunities in all this. And as I was saying earlier, we've embarked on a new path, a new path of renewal, and a new path of growth. We are hard at work to remove the constraints that were evident to many of you, and we are saying that we are open for business. And we've established a culture of being able to have things properly discussed in South Africa, and we've established a culture of being an open government that is willing to receive ideas, proposals, even criticism from our various partners, be it business, be it labor, be it communities. And there are times when I wake up in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, I have Stephen Kosef here, the CEO of Investec, calling me and say, "What are you doing about this and that?" And then sometimes I wake up in the morning, Sello Rasitaba phoning me and saying, "This is not good for black business." And I have not Vavi, but Begin Chalinchali, who is the leader of the biggest labor federation. They call me and say, "This law is not good for labor." And I absorb all that. I absorb all that, all the blows and all the suggestions, And this is what we have engendered, an open style of being able to discuss with our compatriots, because our job is to build a South Africa that can win, so that every concern that anyone can raise, and Stephen will say, this land issue must be properly handled. And I say, don't worry, we're going to handle it properly. And anyone can raise any issue so that we can address it. Stephen will say to me, this resolution that was taken at your conference about the nationalization of the central bank. And I say, Stephen, relax. Whatever we do in our country, we are going to do in a responsible manner, taking into account the interests of our people, taking into account, making sure, yes, that we grow the economy of our country for the benefit of all South Africans. And we are very pleased to be here. And for those who have invested in our country, we welcome you as our partners. We welcome you as our fellow travelers on this journey. And for those of you who have not yet invested, we want to invite you to look at South Africa with keen eyes, because there are great opportunities to be found in South Africa. So welcome to South Africa. Thank you very much.